My name is Eleanor Vance, though most people call me Ellie, and I am 34 years old. For the last decade, I have worked as a senior archivist at the National Archives, a job that most people, including my own family, would describe as quiet, meticulous, and perhaps a little boring. To me, it has never been boring. I am a custodian of truth, a guardian of the brittle, ink-faded pages that hold the legacies of presidents, the fine print of treaties, and, in my specific division, the personal histories of millions of American service members. Each file is a life, a testament to sacrifice, courage, or simply duty performed. The silence of the climate-controlled stacks is not empty. It is filled with the weight of stories, each one sacred in its own way. I always believed my greatest professional challenge would be preserving a water-damaged document or deciphering the faded script of a Civil War soldier's letter home. I never imagined that the most profound test of my integrity would arrive not in a dusty crate, but in a crisp, polite email, an email that threatened to burn down the two things I valued most: the sanctity of the truth I protected, and the fragile peace of my own family. It was a choice that no one should ever have to make, a choice between my sister's happiness and the honor of every real soldier whose story I had ever held in my hands. It began with a lie, a wedding, and a request that would force me to decide which was thicker, blood or the ink of history. Before I tell you how a single email from the Pentagon became the bomb that detonated my life, I want to connect with all of you out there. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It is always so humbling to see how far these stories travel. And if you've ever been put in an impossible position by the people who were supposed to protect you, please hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. And for anyone new here, make sure you subscribe. This is a community for people who understand that sometimes the most difficult battles are fought not on a foreign field, but within our own families. What would you do if the person you loved most in the world asked you to endorse a lie that desecrated everything you believed in? Stick with me, and I'll tell you exactly what I did. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, a perfectly ordinary day that gave no hint of the emotional wreckage to come. It was forwarded to my inbox from the main administrative queue, flagged as a high-priority request from a Pentagon liaison office. This wasn't entirely unusual. We often assisted with verifications for official commendations or historical projects. The sender was a Colonel Marcus Thorne, a name I recognized as a respected figure in military historical circles. The email was polite, almost friendly, which was the first small detail that felt out of place. It was a personal request, cloaked in official language. He explained he was writing on behalf of a Captain Mark Gallagher, a decorated Marine and a former subordinate of his, whom he described as a man of unimpeachable character. Mark was getting married, the colonel wrote, and as part of the celebration, he wanted to include a special tribute in the wedding program to honor his fiancée's own distinguished military service. He just needed official verification of a few details for the tribute's text, as his fiancée was, in his words, extraordinarily humble about her accomplishments. And then I saw the name, and the air in my lungs turned to ice. Fiancée, Claire Elizabeth Vance. My sister. My first thought was that it was a mistake. A different Claire Vance. Had to be. My sister Claire, the vibrant, impulsive, drama-loving Claire, had never spent a day of her life in any military uniform. Her version of a high-stress environment was a sold-out sample sale. Her idea of a tour of duty was a 3-week backpacking trip through Thailand, funded by our parents, which she described with a dramatic flair of someone who had survived a jungle expedition. The email continued, and with each word, the knot in my stomach tightened into a cold, hard stone. Captain Gallagher, the colonel wrote, was particularly keen to confirm the details of her heroism during a deployment to Afghanistan, specifically an engagement near Kandahar where her actions led to the saving of several lives and a subsequent nomination for a Silver Star. A Silver Star. I stared at the words on my screen, my vision blurring. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a simple case of mistaken identity. This was a lie of such breathtaking audacity, of such monumental disrespect, that I felt a wave of nausea roll over me. This was the work of my sister. To understand how Claire could construct such a fantasy, you have to understand the ecosystem in which we were raised. Our family wasn't a family. It was an audience, and Claire was the perpetual star of the show. I was the stagehand, the quiet, reliable one who made sure the lights worked and the props were in place. From our earliest days, our roles were set. I remember my 10th birthday party. My main gift from my parents was a beautiful, intricate model kit of the solar system, something I had begged for months. I spent the entire afternoon in my room, patiently gluing the tiny planets, painting the rings of Saturn, feeling a quiet thrill with each piece I correctly placed. Later, as my friends and family gathered for cake, Claire, who was then 7, burst into the living room holding my finished model, her face beaming. "Look what I made," she announced to a chorus of oohs and ahs. My parents, Sandra and Robert, just beamed at her. "Oh, Claire, you're so clever," my mother gushed, pulling her into a hug. I stood by the doorway, my protest dying in my throat. "But I made that," I whispered. My father just ruffled my hair. "Don't be jealous, Ellie. It's wonderful that your sister is taking an interest in your hobbies." It wasn't about the model. It was about the narrative. Claire was the creator, the achiever. I was the supporting cast, and my role was to applaud. This dynamic only solidified as we grew older. In high school, I poured myself into my studies. The library was my sanctuary, history my passion. I graduated 3rd in my class and won a significant academic scholarship to a good university. At the awards ceremony, my parents clapped politely. They seemed almost bored. 2 weeks later, Claire, a freshman, won Best Supporting Actress in the school's production of Our Town. You would have thought she'd won an Oscar. My parents threw a party for her. They framed the cheap certificate and hung it in the living room, right next to the professional family portrait. My scholarship letter, the one that guaranteed my future, stayed tucked away in a folder in my desk. The message was clear. My achievements were practical, boring, expected. Claire's were special, exciting, worthy of celebration. Her life was a performance, and my parents were her most devoted fans, always willing to suspend their disbelief. Her deceptions were small at first, the kind of exaggerations many people make. She claimed she was a star volleyball player. In reality, she spent most of the season on the bench. She told people she was fluent in French after a 2-week school trip to Paris. But with our parents' implicit endorsement, the lies grew in scale and complexity. They weren't just untruths. They were tools she used to craft an identity, to ensure she was always the most interesting person in the room. When she was fired from a retail job for being perpetually late, she told us she had quit on principle to protest the company's unethical practices. Our father, Robert, actually patted her on the back. "Good for you for standing up for what's right," he'd said, slipping her a few $100s to tide her over. They never questioned her. They never held her accountable. They were her co-authors, helping her revise the story of her life until it was as shiny and impressive as they wanted her to be. I, on the other hand, was the fact-checker they preferred to ignore. My quiet, steady reality was a threat to the dazzling fiction they had all agreed to live in. I sat in my office, the Colonel's email burning a hole in my screen, and I dialed Claire's number. My hand was shaking. I didn't know what to say, how to even begin to unravel this. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice bright and bubbly. "Ellie, to what do I owe the honor?" I took a deep breath. "Claire, I got a strange request at work today." I tried to keep my voice even, professional. I was giving her a chance, an off-ramp. She could feign confusion, claim it was a bizarre mistake, and I could make it go away. There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line, and in that tiny pause I felt the shift. The bubbly charm was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp defensiveness. A request. What kind of request? "It was from the Pentagon," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "About you. About your military service." Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice was a saccharine coo, the one she used when she wanted something she knew she had no right to ask for. "Oh, that. Gosh, I can't believe Mark did that. He's so over the top." She laughed, a brittle, fake sound. "It's really just a silly little thing, Elle. You know how guys like Mark are, all about service and honor. I might have embellished things a little when we first met. It just kind of snowballed. Snowballed. I repeated, my voice rising despite myself. Claire, they're asking me to verify a Silver Star nomination. A Silver Star. Do you have any idea what that means? People die earning that. People perform acts of unbelievable courage. Okay, calm down, she said, her tone suddenly impatient. It's not like I'm hurting anyone. Makes Mark happy. It makes him proud of me. She lowered her voice again, turning back to pleading. Look, Ellie, you work there. You have all those files. Can't you just, create something? A little file. Just something official looking that says I was there. Nobody will ever know. It's just for the wedding program. Please, Ellie. You have to do this for me. The casual audacity of it stole my breath. Create something. Claire, that's a federal crime. It's called falsifying a government record. I would lose my job, my career, everything I've ever worked for. Don't be so dramatic, she scoffed. No one is going to find out. It's for family. Then came the words I knew were coming. The weapon she always deployed when she was cornered. You've always been jealous of me, haven't you? You have your boring, safe little life. And you can't stand to see me happy with a man like Mark. Don't ruin this for me, Ellie. After everything I've done for you. Please. Just this one time, be on my side. I couldn't speak. The accusation, the emotional blackmail, it was a playbook I knew by heart. I had no memory of her ever doing anything for me that didn't ultimately serve her own interests. I mumbled something about having to go and hung up the phone, my heart hammering against my ribs. Felt sick. Not just angry but physically ill. The rest of the day was a blur. I tried to work, but the words on the documents in front of me swam together. The weight of Claire's request of her lie felt like a physical presence in the room. That afternoon, desperate for some kind of moral anchor, I went down into the deep stacks, to a section I knew held records from the more recent conflicts. I pulled a file at random. The name on the tab was Sergeant Daniel Peterson. He was 23 years old when he was killed by an IED in Helmand province. Inside was his entire service history, meticulously documented. Commendations for marksmanship. Letters of recommendation from his superiors. And the final terrible report. The citation for his posthumous Bronze Star with valor. It described in spare factual language how he had shielded 2 other men from the blast, saving their lives at the cost of his own. Tucked into a sleeve at the back of the file were a few personal effects that had been sent home. A creased photo of a young woman smiling, a letter written in a child's clumsy scrawl that said, "Come home soon, Daddy," and a small folded piece of paper. It was a poem he had copied by hand. I sat there on the cold floor of the archive, the silence humming around me, and I read the words of a real hero. The air felt thick with ghosts, the quiet, dignified spirits of men and women like Sergeant Peterson. Their truth was my responsibility. And my sister wanted me to desecrate it. She wanted me to invent a hero, and in doing so, erase the memory of the real ones. I thought of Mark Gallagher, this good man who had served his country, who was being fed a fantasy. His love and respect built on a foundation of lies. And then I thought of my family, of the phone call I knew was coming, the one that would demand I choose the fantasy over the truth, because in my family, the story was always more important than the facts. As if on cue, my phone rang that evening. It was my mother. Claire had obviously wasted no time in spinning her version of events, casting herself as the victim and me as the cold, unfeeling obstacle to her happiness. "Eleanor," my mother began, her voice tight with disappointment. "Your sister called me. She's hysterical." "I'm sure she is," I said, my voice flat. "Now don't take that tone with me. She told me about this misunderstanding at your work. Ellie, you know how Claire can be. She gets carried away, she exaggerates. It's just a little story that got out of hand." "Mom, it's not a little story. She's claiming to be a war hero. She's asking me to commit a crime, to forge documents. This is stolen valor." "Oh, don't be so melodramatic," she sighed, a sound of pure, weary exasperation, as if I were a difficult toddler. It's not hurting anyone. Think about that poor man, Mark. He's so proud of her. If he finds out this was all a lie, he'll be humiliated. It will destroy their relationship. It will ruin the wedding. Your sister's entire future is on the line. Can't you see that? What I see is that she built that future on a lie, I argued, my voice trembling with a frustration that was decades in the making. And what I see, my father's voice suddenly cut in deeper and sterner, is that your sister needs our help, and you are being deliberately difficult. We are a family, Eleanor. We protect our own. Your mother and I have always supported you in your stable career. We've never asked for much. But we are asking now. Help your sister. Fix this. For the family. Fix this. The words echoed in my head. In our family, fixing it never meant telling the truth. It meant smoothing over the cracks in Claire's fabricated world. It meant I was expected to become a co-conspirator, to sacrifice my own principles on the altar of my sister's desires. They weren't asking me to protect Claire. They were asking me to enable her to become a part of the lie. My mother ended the call with a final, cutting remark. I just don't understand you, Ellie. Why do you always have to make things so hard? All this drama over a piece of paper. Just think about what you're doing to your sister. I hung up the phone, the silence in my small apartment feeling vast and suffocating. The piece of paper they dismissed so easily was the very bedrock of my world. And I was being asked to shatter it myself. For the next few days I was caught in a state of suspended animation, a horrible limbo of indecision. My every waking thought was consumed by the lie. At work, the rows of gray archival boxes seemed to mock me, each one a silent judgment on the fraud I was contemplating. I couldn't bring myself to respond to the Colonel's polite email, nor could I bring myself to delete it. It sat in my inbox, a digital time bomb. In an effort to find some kind of clarity, or perhaps just to punish myself, I began to research Claire's fiction. During another tearful pleading phone call, she had given me the details of her invented service, a story she had clearly lifted from a movie or a book. She claimed she had been attached to the 101st Airborne Division, an Army unit, which was a rookie mistake for someone supposedly in the Air Force, but one Mark had apparently overlooked in his adoration. She named a specific forward operating base in Kandahar province, and described a chaotic firefight in the summer of 2011. With a few keystrokes, using the very archival systems I was meant to protect, I began to unravel her story. The 101st had indeed been active in that region during that time. I found the operational logs, the situation reports. And then I found it. The after-action report for an ambush that took place on July 16, 2011, on a patrol route just a few kilometers from the base Claire had named. The details were harrowing. A platoon had been pinned down by heavy fire from a coordinated attack. I read the cold, military prose describing the chaos, the bravery, the tragic cost. The report listed the names of the 2 young men who were killed in action and the 4 others who were wounded. It also detailed the actions of the platoon's medic, a sergeant who had repeatedly exposed himself to enemy fire to render aid, saving at least 2 lives. He had been recommended for a Silver Star. It was all there. Claire hadn't just invented a story. She had stolen a real one. She had taken a day of profound tragedy and heroism and twisted it into a costume for herself. My research didn't stop with the official report. I fell down a rabbit hole of memory and grief. I found an online memorial page for one of the fallen soldiers, a corporal named David Raskin. He was only 21. The page was filled with messages from his family and friends. His mother had written about his infectious laugh and how he had promised to help her plant a new garden when he got home. His high school girlfriend, now a married woman with kids of her own, wrote that she still thought of him every time she heard a certain song on the radio. His platoon mates shared stories of his courage and his terrible jokes. I sat there, tears streaming down my face, reading about the real life that had been violently extinguished on the day my sister had chosen for her fictional heroics. The lie was no longer an abstract betrayal of a principle. It was a ghoulish theft from the dead. It was a desecration of David Raskin's memory, of the medic's bravery, of his mother's unending grief. How could I possibly be a party to that? Just as I was steeling my resolve, a new email landed in my inbox. The subject line was "Following up Claire Vance," and the sender was Mark Gallagher. The colonel, it seemed, had given him my direct contact information. My blood ran cold. I almost deleted it without reading, but my finger froze over the mouse. Had to know. Clicked it open. The email was even worse than I had feared, because it was so incredibly kind. "Dear Ellie," it began, and the informal use of my name felt like a punch to the gut. "Colonel Thorne passed along your details. I hope you don't mind me reaching out directly. I know this is a highly unusual request, and I want to thank you for taking the time to look into it. It means the world to me to be able to honor Claire properly at our wedding. She's so humble about it all, you know? She barely talks about what she went through over there. She says the real heroes are the ones who didn't come home, and she doesn't feel right claiming any glory. That's just the kind of person she is. But I just want the world, or at least our friends and family, to know how proud I am of the hero I'm marrying. Any details you can provide would be a huge help." He ended the email with, "I've attached a photo of us from our engagement party. I thought you might like to see how happy she makes me." I clicked on the attachment. It was a picture of Mark and Claire, standing on a beach at sunset. He was looking down at her, his face filled with an expression of such pure, unadulterated love and admiration that it made my heart ache. Claire was looking up at him, her face a perfect mask of radiant, reciprocated affection. But I knew what was behind that smile. I saw the lie. Mark wasn't just in love with my sister. He was in love with a ghost, a fictional hero she had created to ensnare him. His respect, his pride, the very foundation of his love for her, was rooted in this disgusting fabrication. The email made it impossible to pretend this was a victimless crime. The primary victim was this good, honorable man who was about to pledge his life to a woman he didn't truly know. Closing the email, I felt a surge of cold fury, directed not just at Claire, but at myself for even hesitating. My internal turmoil began to manifest externally. At work, I was distracted and jumpy. I misplaced a file, a minor error that felt like a catastrophic failure. I spilled coffee on a stack of paperwork. My hands trembled as I tried to handle the delicate documents. My colleague Arthur Pendleton noticed. Arthur was a fixture at the archives, a quiet, wry man in his late 60s who had been there for over 40 years. He was a Vietnam veteran, something he rarely talked about, but it informed his entire being. He saw the records not as history, but as biography, as promises kept to the people within them. He found me in the break room, staring blankly at a wall. "A penny for your thoughts, Ellie," he said, his voice gentle. "But from the look on your face, I'd say they're worth a whole lot more. You look like you're carrying the weight of the world. What's in those files that's got you so spooked?" I needed to talk to someone, but I couldn't bring myself to confess the sordid, specific details of my family's dysfunction. So I kept it hypothetical. "Arthur," I began, my voice shaky. "What would you do? What would be the right thing to do if you knew someone was misrepresenting their military service? I mean, seriously misrepresenting it. For personal gain." Arthur's kind face hardened, but not with anger. It was a deep, profound sadness that settled in his eyes. He stirred his tea for a long moment before he spoke. "When I came home from Da Nang," he said softly, "there were two kinds of guys. The ones who talked about it all the time, making themselves out to be John Wayne, and the ones who never said a word. The real heroes, the ones who saw and did the things you can't imagine. They were almost always the quiet ones. The guys who wore the medals were usually the ones who felt they didn't deserve them." He took a sip of his tea. "This place," he gestured around the building, "this is for all of them. The loud ones, the quiet ones, and especially the ones who never came home at all. These records, Ellie, they aren't just paper. They're a promise. A promise from a nation to its soldiers that their service, their truth, will be remembered and protected. It's a sacred trust." He looked me directly in the eye. To betray that trust, to invent a story. It's not just a lie. It's a kind of grave robbing. You're stealing valor from the people who paid for it in blood and pain. You're erasing someone's truth to write your own fiction. His words hit me with the force of a physical blow. He had given voice to the formless horror that had been churning in my gut. Erasing someone's truth to write your own fiction. That was exactly what Claire was doing. And she was asking me to be her publisher. I knew then that I couldn't do it. I just didn't know how to undo it. My indecision must have been palpable to Claire, because she escalated her campaign of coercion. That night, she showed up at my apartment unannounced. I opened the door to find her standing there, her face pale and streaked with tears, a portrait of frantic desperation. She pushed past me into my small living room. "We need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. "You're going to destroy my life, aren't you?" "Claire, you're the one who created this mess," I said, my newfound resolve making my voice stronger than I expected. "I created it to be happy," she shrieked, whirling around to face me. "Something you wouldn't understand. Why are you doing this to me? Is it because you're jealous? Is it because you've always been the good one, the responsible one, and you can't stand to see me, for once in my life, have something so good, so real?" "Real?" I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "There is nothing real about this, Claire. Your relationship with him is built on a lie that disrespects everything he believes in." Her anger suddenly crumbled, replaced by a raw, desperate vulnerability that was far more manipulative. She sank onto my sofa and began to sob, her shoulders shaking. "You don't get it," she whispered through her tears. "You have no idea what it's like to be with a man like Mark. A real genuine hero. He's climbed mountains, he's saved lives, he's stood for something. And what am I? I'm the girl who was good at drama club. I'm the one who changes jobs every 6 months. I'm a nothing. This story. This stupid story, it made me feel like I was worthy of him. For the first time in my life I felt like I was enough. It was the only thing that made me feel equal. I almost felt a flicker of pity for her, for the gaping insecurity that drove her. But it was extinguished by what she said next. She stood up, her face hardening again, her eyes cold. She was delivering her final, most potent threat. "So here's how it's going to be, Ellie," she said, her voice low and venomous. "You can either help me or you can destroy me. But if you choose to destroy me, you need to understand what that means. You will not have a sister anymore. I will never speak to you again. And Mom and Dad. They will never, ever forgive you for what you've done. You'll be an outcast. You will be completely and utterly alone. Is that what you want, Ellie? To be right, and to be all alone for the rest of your life? Because that's your choice." She walked to the door, her hand on the knob. She gave me one last look, a mixture of pleading and warning. "The wedding is in 3 weeks, Ellie. The programs have to be printed next Friday. The choice is yours." And then she was gone, leaving her ultimatum hanging in the air like poison gas. The week that followed was the longest of my life. The deadline Claire had given me, next Friday, loomed like an executioner's axe. The Colonel's office had sent one final polite email. "Just checking in on this, as the wedding is fast approaching. Please let us know if you can provide the verification by Friday EOD. Thank you." Every hour the pressure mounted. I was trapped between 2 impossible choices. On one side was my sister's ultimatum, the threatened exile from my family, a lifetime of being branded the heartless saboteur. On the other side was Arthur's voice in my head, the image of Sergeant Daniel Peterson's file, the kind, trusting eyes of Mark Gallagher. To save my sister, I would have to betray everything I stood for. To uphold my principles, I would have to shatter my family. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I walked through my days in a fog of anxiety. On Thursday night, the eve of the deadline, I sat at my desk at the archives, long after everyone else had gone home. The only light was the glow of my computer monitor, casting long, distorted shadows across the silent, cavernous room. The weight of all those stories, all those lives documented in the endless rows of shelves, felt crushing. I had two documents open on my screen. On the left, I had a blank template for an official service record verification. I had even, in a moment of sheer, desperate weakness, begun to type. Claire Elizabeth Vance. United States Air Force. Dates of service. 2009-2013. The words looked like a sacrilege on the page. I felt a wave of self-disgust and quickly deleted them. On the right side of the screen, I had the file I'd compiled on the real incident. The declassified after-action report from the ambush on July 16, 2011. I had highlighted the relevant passages, the description of the attack, the list of casualties, and the citation for the medic who had earned the real commendation. I stared at the two documents, my fake and the truth, side by side. My sister's happiness versus Corporal David Raskin's memory. My family's love versus Captain Mark Gallagher's honor. For my entire life, I had been the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed things over, the one who swallowed her own feelings to avoid conflict. I had always chosen my family's fragile, fictional peace over the hard, uncomfortable truth. My mother's voice echoed in my mind. Why do you always have to make things so hard? Claire's threat followed right behind it. You will be all alone. I looked around the vast, quiet room. I wasn't alone. I was surrounded by the silent company of millions. I was a guardian here. Arthur's words came back to me, clear as a bell. It's a promise. And in that moment something inside me shifted. A lifetime of quiet resentment, of being dismissed and undervalued, finally hardened into a core of unshakable resolve. The choice was not about being right versus being alone. It was about who I wanted to be. Was I the timid stagehand, forever propping up my sister's fantasies? Or was I Eleanor Vance, a custodian of the truth? My fingers flew across the keyboard, but I wasn't filling out the fake verification form. I was writing an email. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. I composed a short, simple cover letter. It was professional, detached, and utterly factual. It read, Dear Captain Gallagher, per your request for service verification for Claire Elizabeth Vance, which was forwarded to my office by Colonel Marcus Thorne, I have completed my search of the official military personnel records. The National Personnel Records Center can find no record of military service for Claire Elizabeth Vance with any branch of the United States Armed Forces. However, in your correspondence, you mentioned a specific interest in her connection to an engagement involving the 101st Airborne Division near Kandahar in the summer of 2011. For your historical context and reference, I have taken the liberty of attaching the declassified after-action report concerning the specific operation that matches the details you provided. I would draw your attention to pages 4 and 5, which contain the official list of decorated personnel and casualties from that engagement. Sincerely, Eleanor Vance, Senior Archivist, National Archives and Records Administration. I read it over twice. It was perfect. I hadn't accused. I hadn't editorialized. I hadn't called my sister a liar. I simply laid the unvarnished truth next to her fiction and trusted a man of principle to see the gaping chasm between them. I created a new PDF document, combining my cover letter with the official watermarked after-action report. I titled the file, record_verification_PDF. I attached it to a new email, addressed directly to Mark Gallagher. The subject line was neutral, professional. Record verification for C. Vance. My finger hovered over the send button. This was it. The point of no return. I saw flashes of everything that would come next. Claire's screaming rage, my mother's tearful accusations, my father's cold disappointment. I saw the image of our family, fractured and broken, with me standing on the outside. But then I saw the face of the young soldier in the memorial photo, and the trusting eyes of Mark Gallagher. Press send. The email vanished from my outbox. A profound, terrifying, and liberating silence descended. I had done it. I had chosen the truth. A few minutes later, my phone began to buzz on the desk. The screen lit up with Claire's name. Buzzed again. My mother. Again. My father. I looked at it. This small device that was now a conduit for all the anger and betrayal I had just unleashed. With a steady hand, I reached over and powered it off. I sat back in my chair in the deep, profound quiet of the archives, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. I had done the right thing. The storm broke the next day. But it was a distant storm, one I observed from the safety of my self-imposed exile. I kept my phone off for the entire weekend. I knew it would be an avalanche of rage, guilt, and manipulation, and for the first time in my life, I refused to be buried by it. When I finally turned it on Monday morning, it was a wasteland of my family's fury. Dozens of missed calls. Voicemails that I deleted without listening to, their angry tones audible even in the first few seconds. And the text, a long, rambling screed from my mother calling me a cruel, jealous monster who had no heart. A short, sharp message from my father. You have destroyed this family. Do not contact us. And a single venomous text from Claire. I hope you're happy. You're dead to me. Hurt. The words were like tiny shards of glass in my heart. But beneath the pain, there was a strange, unfamiliar feeling. Relief. The toxic ties that had bound me for so long had been severed. The performance was over. I was finally free. Late that afternoon, a call came through from a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, then answered, my voice wary. Hello, Miss Vance. Ellie. The voice on the other end was quiet, heavy. It's Mark Gallagher. My stomach lurched. I braced myself for an attack, for him to call me a homewrecker. I got your email, he said, and then there was a long, heavy pause. I could hear him take a ragged breath. Thank you. The words were so unexpected, so full of quiet sincerity, that I didn't know how to respond. Thank you, he repeated, his voice stronger now. For your integrity. For respecting our history enough not to lie to me. For telling me the truth. He explained in a detached, almost clinical tone what had happened. He had read my email. He had read the after-action report. He had seen the names of the real soldiers. And then he had sat down with Claire. Once I knew what to ask, he said, his voice hollow. The whole story just fell apart. The jargon was wrong. The details didn't line up. She couldn't even name her commanding officer. It all came out. There was another pause. The wedding is off. It's over. He sounded utterly broken but also resolute. I needed to call and thank you. I'm sorry you were put in that position. It was an impossible choice, and you made the honorable one. We spoke for another minute, a strange and somber conversation between two people linked by the same lie. When he hung up, I felt a profound sense of validation. It wasn't triumph or revenge. It was a quiet acknowledgement, from the one person whose opinion on the matter truly counted, that I had done the right thing. The weeks that followed were quiet. The ostracism from my family was total. I was disinvited from my cousin's upcoming graduation party. My mother's birthday passed without a word. It was a strange new reality, filled with a silence that was both lonely and liberating. I filled the void with my work, with long walks through the city, with the simple pleasure of my own uncomplicated company. One Saturday, I found myself at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, tracing the names etched into the black granite. I thought about Arthur and about the promises we keep. I finally understood that I hadn't destroyed my family. My family had been an illusion, a carefully constructed stage play. All I had done was turn on the house lights. The grief for the family I wished I had was real, but so was my burgeoning sense of self-respect. I didn't need their applause anymore. My worth wasn't determined by their skewed narrative. Arthur saw the change in me. He stopped me by the coffee machine one morning. "You look lighter, Ellie," he said with a knowing look in his eye. "Whatever it was, you made the right choice." And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that he was right. A year can change everything. In the 12 months that followed the cancelled wedding, I didn't just survive. I thrived. The newfound peace in my personal life seemed to bleed into my professional one. I poured my energy into my work with a renewed sense of purpose. I was promoted, chosen to lead a special project to digitize and orally preserve the testimonies of aging veterans from the Korean and Vietnam Wars. Sitting with these men, listening to their real stories of fear and boredom and flashes of incredible bravery, felt like a sacred duty. My life was quiet, but it was authentic. It was mine. The pain of the schism with my family had faded, like a poorly healed bone that still ached on rainy days, but no longer dictated my every move. I was even dating someone, a kind history professor who found my passion for the past fascinating, not boring. He loved me for my quiet strength, not for a fabricated story of who I was. Then, one autumn afternoon, a letter arrived at my apartment. The handwriting on the envelope was familiar, a looping, dramatic script I hadn't seen in over a year. It was from Claire. My first instinct was to throw it away, to protect the fragile peace I had built. But curiosity, or perhaps some lingering echo of sisterly connection, made me open it. The letter inside was not what I expected. There were no accusations, no pleas, no drama. It was just a few simple pages, written in a clear, unadorned hand. It was an apology. A real one. She wrote that after Mark left, she had hit rock bottom. The elaborate scaffolding of her life, built from 1,000 little lies, had completely collapsed. For the first time, there was no one there to catch her, no parents to co-sign her fictions. She had been forced to face the empty space where her true self should have been. She had started therapy, she wrote, and it was the hardest thing she had ever done. She was confronting the deep-seated insecurity that had fueled her entire life. She didn't ask for my forgiveness. She said she knew she hadn't earned it. But she wanted me to know that she finally understood. "You didn't destroy my life, Ellie," she wrote in the final paragraph. "You just stopped letting me build it on a lie. In a strange way, you gave me a chance to build something real. Thank you." She told me she was working a simple job at a plant nursery and was taking a community college class, just one. She was, for the first time, trying to be Claire Vance, not a character she had invented. A few weeks later, a final, strange piece of the story clicked into place. I was grabbing coffee at a cafe near the National Mall when a man holding the door open for me looked familiar. It was Mark. He looked different, leaner, his face more weathered, but his eyes were clear. It was awkward for a moment, the two of us standing there, linked by a painful shared history. He told me he'd re-enlisted, not for a combat role, but as an instructor at Quantico, training young Marine officers. He said going back, shaping the next generation, had helped him find his purpose again. We had a brief, respectful conversation, two adults who had been through an ordeal and come out the other side. As he was about to leave, he paused and turned back to me. "You know," he said, a small, sad smile on his face, "for what it's worth, you have more integrity in your little finger than a lot of the colonels I know." And that was it. That was the validation I never knew I needed. It wasn't about being a hero. It was about honoring the real ones. My name is Stella, and I'm 34 years old. Before I tell you about the day my entire world was turned upside down in the most spectacularly public way, before I get into the story of how my family's deepest shame became my greatest triumph, I just want you to take in this moment with me. I'm standing in a kitchen that smells of toasted fennel and simmering tomatoes, a beautiful, sprawling space with warm wooden countertops and gleaming copper pots hanging from a rack above me. It's a television studio, and my name, Stella Rossi, is painted in elegant script on the brick wall behind me. This is my kitchen, my show, my life. But if you'd told me this would happen even 2 years ago, I would have laughed until I cried, because for most of my life, my cooking was a secret, a source of quiet, burning shame. I never ever imagined that the food I was taught to hide would lead me here, or that the person auditioning to be my right hand, my sous chef, would be the very architect of that humiliation. My own sister Eliza. Before I dive into how a simple pot of lentil soup could cause a family to completely implode, I want to connect with all of you who have taken the time to be here. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It means the world to me to see how far these stories can travel. And if you've ever felt underestimated, if you've ever had a passion that someone else tried to belittle, go ahead and hit that like button. And for all the new faces here, make sure you subscribe because you've just found a community of people who understand that sometimes the things others dismiss about you are actually your greatest strengths. Now let's get into it. It always started with a smell. For me, the scent of garlic browning slowly in olive oil or a pot of rich goulash simmering for hours on the stovetop was the smell of home. It was the smell of love, of security, of our great-grandmother Nana Elena's legacy living on in our small suburban kitchen. But for my parents, Mark and Catherine, and especially for my sister Eliza, 2 years my junior, it was the smell of everything they were trying to escape. They called it peasant food. The term was usually deployed with a delicate little sniff from my mother, a dismissive wave of the hand from my father, or a full-on theatrical eye roll from Eliza. My food, Nana Elena's food, was heavy, it was brown, it was unsophisticated. It was a stubborn, aromatic reminder of a past they wanted to scrub clean, a past of hardship and making do, a past they felt was beneath the gleaming, upwardly mobile future they envisioned for their family, a future that was pinned entirely on Eliza. Eliza was born shimmering. Or at least that's how it felt. While I was quiet and content with my hands in a bowl of dough, Eliza was dazzling, all sharp wit and ambition. She had a palate, they said. She didn't just eat, she experienced. She could detect a hint of saffron in a dish. She could lament the improper searing on a scallop. Our parents drank it in, mesmerized. They saw her as their masterpiece, their ticket to a different kind of life. One where people discussed wine pairings at dinner parties and had art on the walls that wasn't a framed school photo. I, on the other hand, was the reliable, sturdy foundation upon which Eliza's glittering tower could be built. I was practical Stella, quiet Stella, the one who made sure the bills were organized and that there was always a simple, filling meal on the table, a meal that was increasingly met with polite but pained smiles. The day Eliza got her acceptance letter to Le Cordon Bleu in Paris was treated with the kind of reverence usually reserved for a royal decree. My father held the thick, creamy envelope as if it were a holy relic. My mother wept with joy, her hands fluttering at her chest. Oh, Mark, she did it. She's really going to be a chef. Eliza, for her part, accepted the news with a practiced, modest grace, as if it were an inevitability. That evening, my father sat us both down in the living room. The air was thick with a momentous energy. I had just come home from my shift at the local library, my feet aching, my mind still full of decimal systems and late fees. "Girls," my father began, his voice uncharacteristically solemn, "your sister's education is going to be a significant expense. It's the finest culinary school in the world, and it comes with a price tag to match. Your mother and I have discussed it, and we've decided to remortgage the house to make this dream a reality for her." He looked at Eliza, his eyes shining with pride. "It's an investment, you see. An investment in her future, in our family's future." He then turned to me, his expression shifting to one of practical expectation. "Stella, this means we'll all have to tighten our belts. I know you're responsible. We're going to need you to pitch in a bit more around here. Help us keep things afloat while Eliza is off pursuing her art." I just nodded, my own small dream of finishing my library sciences degree at the community college seeming to shrink and fade into the floral pattern of the wallpaper behind him. There was no discussion, no question of whether this was fair. It was simply a fact. Eliza was the artist. I was the support staff. That night, to celebrate, my mother announced we were going out for dinner. "Somewhere special," she declared. "No heavy peasant food tonight." We went to a sterile, minimalist French bistro downtown. Eliza spent the entire meal deconstructing the menu, explaining the techniques to our rapt parents. I ordered the simplest thing I could find and watched them, feeling like a ghost at the table, a black and white photograph in their vibrant, full-color world. The next few years settled into a grinding routine. I took on a second job, waitressing on weekends at a local diner, the smell of coffee and frying bacon clinging to my clothes. Every spare dollar I earned went into the joint family account, a silent contribution to the ever-growing mountain of debt. My parents never asked where the extra money came from. They just accepted it as part of the collective belt-tightening. Eliza would send emails from Paris filled with photographs of impossibly intricate pastries and gleaming professional kitchens. She wrote about learning to make foams and gels, how to plate a single-leaf salad with tweezers, how to clarify a consommé until it was as clear as glass. During one of her rare visits home, I found her in our kitchen, a place she now treated like a foreign and slightly unhygienic land. She was practicing making a quenelle, a perfectly smooth three-sided oval of fish mousse, using 2 spoons with intense, focused precision. On the stove, I had a large pot of my chicken and dumplings simmering away, filling the house with its warm, savory scent. Eliza wrinkled her nose without looking up from her task. "That smell," she murmured, a hint of disdain in her voice. "It just hangs in the air, doesn't it? That stuff will clog your arteries, Stell. It's so dense." She finally perfected her quenelle, a pale, delicate little thing on a vast white plate. She held it up for our mother to admire. "See, Mom. This is what elegance tastes like. It's about lightness, finesse." My pot of dumplings, meant to feed the entire family for 2 days, suddenly felt like a clumsy, leaden weight on the stove. My food was sustenance, hers was art. And in our family, only art was worthy of investment. The financial strain, which had been a low hum in the background, began to roar. I saw the letters from the bank, first polite reminders, then stark warnings in red ink. I heard my parents' hushed, frantic arguments through the thin walls of our house late at night. "Mark, the second mortgage payment is due, and after paying Eliza's tuition installment, we're short. We're almost $1,000 short." My father's voice would be low and weary. "We'll manage. We always do. This is for Eliza." I lay in bed, my stomach twisting into knots of anxiety. The weight of their choice, their gamble, was pressing down on all of us, but I was the only one who seemed to feel the floorboards groaning. One afternoon I sat down with them at the kitchen table, a stack of my pay stubs and the latest warning from the bank in my hands. "Mom, Dad," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "I've been thinking, maybe I could defer my last semester at the community college. I could pick up more shifts at the diner. We could get ahead of this." My mother reached across the table and patted my hand, her touch light and dismissive. "Oh, Stella, that's so sweet of you to offer, dear. But we can't let you do that. Besides," she added, her voice brightening as she shifted to the topic that truly mattered, "Eliza's education is an investment, a real long-term investment. It's going to pay for itself 100 times over when she's a world-famous chef." My offer, my sacrifice, was treated like a child's drawing offered to an art curator. A sweet, clumsy gesture, but ultimately not of any real value. The ultimate humiliation came on my father's birthday. It was a milestone, his 60th, and I wanted to do something special, something that felt like him. I decided to make his absolute favorite meal from his own childhood. A rich, dark beef and barley soup, slow-cooked for 6 hours with root vegetables and fresh herbs, and a dense, rustic rye bread, just like his mother used to make. I spent the entire day in the kitchen, the process a loving meditation. The house filled with a deep, comforting aroma. I felt a rare flicker of pride, of hope. I thought, this they will have to appreciate. Eliza, who was home for the weekend, walked into the kitchen just as I was setting the table. She took one look at the steaming tureen of soup and the dark loaf of bread, and her face fell into an expression of theatrical pity. "Oh, Stell," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You didn't. For Dad's big birthday. It's so brown." She turned and called out to our parents. "Mom, Dad, we can't have this for the birthday dinner. It's a celebration. It feels like we're in a Dickens novel." Before I could even protest, she had her phone out. "I know a fantastic sushi place that delivers. It's clean, it's elegant. Let's get some proper celebratory food." My parents, eager to please their golden child and embrace this vision of elegance, quickly agreed. "Oh yes, that sounds lovely, dear," my mother said, not even looking at me. "A wonderful idea." An hour later, they were all sitting around the dining table, laughing and fumbling with chopsticks over pristine boxes of sushi and sashimi. My tureen of soup sat on the kitchen counter, untouched, a film slowly forming on its cooling surface. I watched them from the doorway, a lump forming in my throat that was harder and heavier than any dumpling I had ever made. I had cooked my heart out, offered a piece of our family's history, and they had rejected it in favor of cold rice and raw fish, all because it was more fashionable. The shame was so intense, so total it felt like a physical illness. That night I knew something had to change. I couldn't keep living like this, a second-class citizen in my own home, my love and labor treated as a source of embarrassment. A few weeks later, the foreclosure notice arrived. It wasn't a warning this time. It was a formal, legal document with a date. The panic that set in was cold and sharp. My father turned ashen. My mother took to her bed with a migraine. Eliza, when they called to tell her, was furious. "How could you let this happen?" she'd shrieked over the phone. "My career is just starting. I can't be associated with this. People will think we're failures." There was no we. There was only her reputation. Feeling utterly helpless, I retreated to the attic, the one place that was truly mine, filled with dusty boxes and forgotten things. I was looking for old photo albums, something to distract myself, when my fingers brushed against a small tin box. Nana Elena's recipe box. Opened it. The cards were yellowed with age, brittle at the edges, covered in her spidery, elegant Italian script. There was the goulash, the pierogies, the beef and barley soup. But there were others I'd forgotten. A recipe for bread made with potato water to save on flour, a sweet polenta cake made with olive oil instead of butter, a desperation pasta using chickpeas and garlic. These weren't just recipes. They were testaments to resilience. They were stories of how to create warmth, flavor, and dignity from almost nothing. As I held them, a quiet, defiant idea began to form. It wasn't a grand plan for vindication. It was a small, desperate prayer. What if other people valued this? What if there were others out there who were tired of foams and gels and wanted something real? What if I could make a few $100s a month, just enough to help, without them ever knowing? That night, my husband Marco came home from his construction job to find me at our small kitchen table. His laptop open, a determined look on my face. Marco was my rock, a steady, warm presence in the constant, chilly wind of my family's judgment. He was the only one who saw my food not as peasant fare, but as a gift. "This food has more soul in one spoonful than Eliza's entire tuition," he'd grumble after another one of my family's dismissive comments. "They don't have a clue what they're talking about, Stell." I told him my idea. Food blog. Sharing Nana's recipes and stories. He didn't hesitate. "It's about time," he said, his hand covering mine. "Let the world see what I see." I was terrified. I used my first name Stella, but I took Marco's last name, Rossi, as my online identity. It felt safer, a thin shield between this new, fragile venture and my family's potential scorn. I called the blog The Hearth and Spoon. My first post was for a simple, rustic loaf of peasant bread. I used my old phone to take a picture, the light from the kitchen window falling across the cracked, golden crust. I wrote not just the instructions but the story behind it. How Nana Elena would say that a house with a smell of baking bread could never be a sad house. I hit publish, my heart pounding in my chest. For the first few days, there was nothing but the sound of digital crickets. Then a single comment appeared. "This looks just like the bread my Polish babcia used to make. Thank you for the memory." Then another. And another. They were small voices in the vastness of the internet, but to me they were a chorus. Kept posting. The lentil soup. The chicken and dumplings. I wrote about the history, the feelings, the memories baked into each one. My audience grew slowly. A small but fiercely loyal community of people who understood. One day, a check for $62.41 from an ad network arrived in the mail. I held it in my hands, tears welling in my eyes. It wasn't about the money. It was about the validation. It was proof that something I created, something that came from my heart and my hands, had value. I showed Marco, and he picked me up and spun me around the kitchen. "I told you, Stella Rossi," he said, his voice thick with pride. I told you it was magic. I tried to mention it to my family once, a tentative. I started a little food blog, just for fun. My father grunted from behind his newspaper. That's nice, dear. Don't waste too much time on that internet nonsense. The door to their world remained firmly closed. But another one, a world I was building for myself, was just starting to creak open. The moment everything changed came on a rainy Tuesday. I had decided to post the recipe for Nana Elena's Sunday ragu. It was more than a recipe. It was a weekend-long ritual. A sacred process of browning meat, simmering tomatoes for 8 hours, the smell slowly deepening and enriching until it permeated every molecule of the house. I wrote about that smell, about how, as a child, it was my calendar, my clock, my compass. I wrote that the Sunday ragu meant my father would be home from work, it meant laughter, it meant we were all safe and together under one roof, that everything was okay. I poured all my childhood longing for that feeling into the post, attached a single unpretentious photo of the rich, dark sauce clinging to a tangle of pasta, and I let it go. I didn't know that a very famous food writer, a man named Julian Croft, who had built his reputation on celebrating Michelin-starred temples of gastronomy, was having a crisis of faith. He was tired of tweezers and foams, of food that was intellectual but not nourishing. That night he stumbled upon my blog. He read my post about the ragu. And he shared it with his 2 million followers with a single comment. I've been writing about food for 20 years, and this is the first thing I've read in a long time that made me remember why I started. This is real. I woke up the next morning to chaos. My phone was buzzing itself off the nightstand. My laptop was flashing with so many notifications it looked like a strobe light. The Hearth and Spoon had gone viral. Thousands of emails, tens of thousands of comments. My humble little blog, which usually got a few hundred visitors a day, had received over 1 million hits overnight, crashing the server. The comments were a tidal wave of emotion. People from every corner of the globe were sharing stories of their own grandmothers, of their family's special dishes, of the connection between food and love. Your nana's ragu is my nana's borscht. This is my abuela's mole. My grandpa's cassoulet. I had tapped into a deep, universal current of longing for authenticity, for connection, for home. The ad revenue exploded. In one day, I made more than I earned in 6 months of waitressing. The first thing I did was go to the bank and get a cashier's check. I made it out to my parents' mortgage company, for the exact amount they were behind, plus a little extra. I mailed it anonymously. I did the same thing the next month, and the month after that. My mother called me, perplexed and relieved. It's a miracle, Stella. The bank said there was some kind of error in our favor, or a loan modification went through. We're saved. I just murmured my congratulations, my heart a confusing mix of relief, pride, and a bitter lingering sadness that I had to save them from the shadows. Then came the email that I almost deleted as spam. The subject line read, "Literary representation for the Hearth and Spoon." It was from David Chen, a top agent at a major New York literary agency. He wanted to talk. On the phone, his voice was fast, sharp, and full of energy. "Stella, I've been doing this for 15 years. I know a phenomenon when I see one. You're not just a blogger. You're a storyteller. People are starved for what you're giving them. They're drowning in perfectly curated, impersonal content. And you threw them a lifeline made of pasta. I want to sell your cookbook." Cookbook. The idea was so far beyond my wildest dreams that I laughed. But David was serious. We spent weeks putting together a proposal, with my stories and recipes and his brilliant industry insights. He submitted it to the major publishing houses. A bidding war erupted. I watched the numbers climb in a state of suspended disbelief, with Marco holding my hand, his face a permanent beam of pride. I ended up signing a deal with a major publisher for a 6-figure advance. A life-changing amount of money. Enough to pay off my parents' entire mortgage, to fund my own degree a dozen times over. I sat at my kitchen table with the signed contract in front of me, the same table where my family had dismissed my efforts for years, and I cried. But for the first time they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. I told no one in my family. It was my secret, a brilliant, shining thing that they couldn't tarnish with their judgment or try to claim as their own. My only confidants were Marco and David. My life had split into two parallel realities, the celebrated successful Stella Rossi and the quiet, overlooked Stella Vance, who still went to her parents' house for Sunday dinner and politely ate whatever bland, healthy meal my mother had prepared. While my star was ascending in secret, Eliza's was beginning to falter. She had graduated from Le Cordon Bleu with honors, her toque held high. But the reality of the fine dining world was a brutal shock. She wasn't hailed as a visionary artist. She was a commis chef, the lowest rank in the kitchen hierarchy, at a famous 3-Michelin-starred restaurant in New York called Aurelia. Her life became a monotonous, high-pressure grind. I knew this because she would call our parents to complain. Her voice a thin, reedy whine of disillusionment. "They have me shelling fava beans for 12 hours a day, Mom. Me. With my palate. The head chef, Chef Renaud, he's a complete tyrant. He screamed at me for 15 minutes because my brunoise was a fraction of a millimeter too large. He doesn't see my artistry. I'm just a cog in his machine." My parents would coo and soothe her over the speakerphone. "Don't you worry, sweetie. Your talent is just too big for them to recognize. They're intimidated." They would send her money to help with her exorbitant New York rent, care packages filled with expensive olive oils and cheeses. They were sending her the very money I was providing, funneling my secret success into propping up her perceived one. The irony was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. In one call I heard her say, "And the food here? It's all so pretentious. Tiny little portions of things that don't even taste good. It's all for show. God, I'd kill for just a normal plate of pasta, something real." She said it with a sigh of exhaustion, completely oblivious to the fact that half the country was saying the same thing while cooking recipes from my blog. My cookbook, The Hearth and Spoon, Recipes from a Forgotten Kitchen, was released a year later. It was an instant bestseller. David had done an incredible job. It was a beautiful book, with gorgeous, moody photography and all of Nana's stories woven throughout. It was featured in magazines on morning talk shows. I did the interviews over the phone, still clinging to my anonymity, and won a prestigious James Beard Award. I was Stella Rossi, a household name in the culinary world, a champion of authenticity and tradition. And at home I was just Stella, folding laundry and helping my dad with a crossword puzzle. The success of the book led to the final, unbelievable offer. An email from a senior vice president at the Food and Family Network. They didn't just want an interview. They wanted to give me a show. "We don't want another competition show, another shouting chef." The executive, a sharp, kind woman named Maria, told me on a video call. "We want you. We want the Hearth and Spoon brought to life. The concept is simple. You travel the country, finding families with their own peasant food traditions, and you cook with them. You celebrate their stories. You're the perfect person to host it. You have this incredible warmth and authenticity that comes through even in your writing." I was paralyzed with terror and exhilaration. Being on camera was my worst nightmare. But Marco and David urged me on. "This is the whole point, Stell," Marco said, his eyes serious. "This is your chance to give a voice to all the Nana Alinas out there." I agreed. The network moved fast. They built a stunning set, a perfect replica of a warm, rustic dream kitchen. They hired a production crew. And they told me they would handle the hiring for all the support staff, including a crucial role, my on-air sous chef. "We're thinking of someone with a classic fine dining background," Maria explained. "It will create a fascinating dynamic on screen. The master of haute cuisine learning from the master of heart cuisine. We're holding blind auditions. We'll screen the resumes for pedigree and bring you the top 3 to make the final choice." I thought it was a brilliant idea, a way to bridge the two worlds of food. I had no idea that I was about to witness a head-on collision between my two lives, and that my sister was in the driver's seat of the other car. The day of the final auditions arrived, cloaked in the surreal hum of a television studio. The set for Hearth and Spoon was even more beautiful in person than it had been in the design sketches. It was a fantasy kitchen, with aged brick walls, thick wooden beams, and shelves filled with colorful jars of pickles and preserves that glinted under the warm glow of the studio lights. I walked through it, running my hand along the cool marble countertop, my heart thumping a nervous but steady rhythm against my ribs. This was real. After a lifetime of being relegated to the background, I was finally the one in the spotlight. Maria, the executive producer, met me near the main cooking island. She was a whirlwind of efficiency and energy, a headset perched on her perfectly coiffed hair. "Stella, darling, you look wonderful. Are you ready to meet your potential partners in crime?" she asked with a grin. "We've had dozens of applicants. The talent is incredible, but we've narrowed it down to 3 finalists. We've done blind resume screenings, so their names won't mean anything to you, but their credentials are top-notch. The first 2 were fantastic, really solid. But this last one, her resume is impeccable." She glanced down at her tablet. Graduated top of her class at Le Cordon Bleu. Did a stage at Aurelia in New York. Technically, she's a powerhouse. A little intense, maybe, but brilliant. She tapped the screen. Her name is Eliza Vance. The world tilted on its axis. Vance, my maiden name. The name I had left behind. The name tied to all the shame and dismissal. It couldn't be. It had to be a coincidence, a cruel joke played by the universe. I could feel the blood draining from my face. "Eliza Vance," I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. Maria didn't notice my reaction, too caught up in the logistics of the show. "Yes, that's her. We're bringing her in now. The final test is a fun one. Blind tasting. We want to see how their palate works and how they think on their feet. Let's head over to the viewing room. You can watch her on the monitor, and then we'll bring you out for the big reveal." I followed her numbly, my feet feeling like they were encased in lead. My mind was racing. Was it possible? Had Eliza's fine dining dreams crumbled so completely that she was auditioning for a show on a family-friendly network? And could she be so completely oblivious, so wrapped up in her own world, that she had no idea that Stella Rossi, the current darling of the food world, was her own sister? It seemed impossible, and yet, knowing my family's unique brand of self-absorption, it also felt terrifyingly plausible. We sat in the darkened viewing room, a small space with a large monitor that showed a live feed of the main set. "Okay, bringing in the final candidate," a voice crackled through the intercom. The studio door opened and she walked in. It was her. My sister. She looked different, harder. The youthful shimmer had been replaced by a brittle, polished veneer. She was wearing a severe, high-collared black chef's coat. Her hair pulled back in a tight, unforgiving bun. Her face was a mask of tense professionalism, her eyes darting around, taking in the producers and the cameras, but not yet lingering on the actual set itself. She was there to perform, to impress, to win. Maria's voice, now godlike through the studio speakers, explained the challenge. "Welcome, Eliza. For your final audition, we have a simple task. In front of you is a dish. You will taste it, and then you will tell us 3 things. First, identify its primary components and flavor profile. Second, describe its culinary origins as you perceive them. And third, tell us how you would elevate this dish into a signature appetizer for a high-end fine dining menu." A production assistant walked onto the set and placed a small, rustic earthenware bowl on the counter in front of Eliza. It was covered with a silver cloche. My breath caught in my throat. I knew what was under there. It was my great-grandmother's lentil soup, the first recipe I had ever posted on the blog, the humblest and most honest dish I knew. The assistant lifted the cloche with a flourish. Eliza looked down at the simple brown soup. She picked up the spoon, her movements precise and clinical. She dipped it in, raised it to her lips, and tasted. For a single, fleeting moment, a flicker of something crossed her face. It wasn't recognition, not exactly. It was more like the ghost of a memory, a phantom limb of a feeling she had long since amputated. It was the taste of her own childhood, a taste she had been taught to despise. The flicker vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by a cool, analytical expression. She placed the spoon down carefully. "Well," she began, her voice crisp and authoritative, projecting for the producers. "It's rustic." She said the word like it was a contagion. "Very simple. Peasant fare, clearly. The primary components are lentils, obviously. Some mirepoix, carrot, celery, onion, not finely diced. A bit of potato, probably for body. The broth is thin. It's the kind of thing one eats for sustenance, not for pleasure." She looked up, a small, condescending smile playing on her lips. She was in her element, showing off her sophisticated palate, demonstrating her superiority over this lowly bowl of soup. "As for how I would elevate it," she continued, warming to her theme, "the possibilities are endless for a trained chef. First, the texture is all wrong. It's gruelish. I would strain the solids and create a clarified lentil consommé. Crystal clear, intensely flavored. I'd use the discarded carrots to make a delicate, airy foam. The potatoes could be turned into a paper-thin, crispy tuile for a textural contrast. Perhaps a scattering of micro-parsley and a drizzle of truffle oil to finish. You see, the goal is to take the humble soul of the dish and give it elegance and complexity. To deconstruct it and rebuild it into something worthy of a discerning palate." In the viewing room, I felt a strange and sudden calm descend upon me. The years of quiet shame, of feeling small and unsophisticated, simply evaporated. I saw her not as my dazzling, intimidating older sister, but as she truly was. A woman so insecure, so terrified of being seen as simple, that she had to chemically alter and destroy the very idea of home. I stood up. "I'm going out there," I said to Maria, my voice low but steady. Maria's eyes widened, sensing the impending drama. She just nodded slowly. I pushed open the door to the viewing room and walked from the shadows of the production area onto the brightly lit set. The sound of my heels on the concrete floor was the only noise in the suddenly silent studio. Eliza was still talking, gesturing passionately about a parsnip puree. Her back mostly to me. "The key is to strip away the heaviness, the poverty of it all," she was saying. "Eliza," said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the air like a blade. Her head snapped up. She turned, her monologue cut short. Her eyes found me, and her brain seemed to short-circuit. The confident, articulate chef vanished, replaced by a confused girl. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She blinked, as if I were a hallucination she was trying to clear from her vision. Her gaze flickered from my face to the enormous Stella Rossi logo painted on the wall behind me, then down to the humble bowl of soup on the counter, and then back to me. The pieces began to click into place, each one landing with an audible shattering crack in the cathedral-like silence of the studio. Her face, a carefully constructed mask of ambition, crumbled, revealing the raw shock and dawning horror beneath. "Stella," she finally stammered, the name a foreign object in her mouth. What are you doing here? Is this a joke?" A producer, smelling television gold, prompted gently from the side. "Do you two know each other?" The question hung in the air, charged and dangerous. I took another step forward, closing the distance between us until I was standing on the other side of the cooking island, the bowl of soup sitting between us like a silent witness. "This isn't a joke, Eliza," I said, my voice filled with a sadness that surprised me. "This is my show." I paused, letting the words sink in, watching the last traces of color drain from her face. I gestured to the bowl. "And this is my great-grandmother's lentil soup. The peasant food you were just about to turn into foam and dust." The silence that followed was absolute. It was profound. It was the sound of a lifetime of carefully constructed family mythology collapsing in on itself. Eliza stared at me, her eyes wide with a cocktail of emotions I couldn't even begin to name. Disbelief, fury, humiliation, and a sliver of something that looked like pure, unadulterated panic. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. There were no words, no witty retorts, no condescending pronouncements left. She had been rendered utterly, completely speechless. Then, in a single jerky movement, she turned and fled. She didn't just walk off the set. She ran, pushing past a bewildered camera operator and disappearing through the studio doors, leaving behind nothing but a stunned production crew and the lingering, honest scent of lentil soup. In the ringing silence, all eyes turned to me. Maria walked onto the set, her expression a mixture of professional concern and undisguised fascination. "Well," she said, her voice low. "That was unexpected. Stella, is this going to be a problem for us?" I took a deep, steadying breath, the air feeling cleaner, lighter than it had in years. I looked at Maria, the powerful TV executive, and for the first time I felt like her equal. "No, Maria," I said, a small, weary smile touching my lips. "It's not a problem. It's a clarification." I spent the next 10 minutes giving her the condensed version of my life, of the two Stellas, the two kitchens, the two worlds I had been inhabiting. When I finished, she was shaking her head slowly, a look of awe on her face. "Authenticity," she whispered, almost to herself. "We wanted authenticity for this show. My God, did we get it?" She looked at me with newfound respect. "You're a star, Stella Rossi. A real one." The drive home with Marco was quiet. I replayed the scene in my head, but the shame I expected to feel on Eliza's behalf wasn't there. There was only a strange, quiet sense of release, as if a heavy cloak I'd been forced to wear my whole life had finally been lifted from my shoulders. It was only a matter of time, of course. When we walked in the door, my phone was already ringing. I saw the caller ID. "Mom." My stomach did its familiar, conditioned flip-flop of anxiety. I let it ring, and ring, and ring. Finally it went to voicemail. A minute later it rang again. This time I answered, putting it on speaker for Marco to hear. "Stella." "Thank God." My mother's voice was high-pitched and frantic. "Eliza just called me. She's hysterical, absolutely beside herself. Something about a television show. She said you humiliated her, that you set her up. She's not making any sense. Stella, what on earth did you do to your sister?" The old familiar script. Eliza is upset, so Stella must be to blame. The automatic assumption that I was the aggressor, the troublemaker. The old me would have withered. I would have apologized, tried to smooth things over. But the woman who had stood on that set was not the old me. "Mom," I said, my voice calm and even. "Nothing is wrong. But a lot has changed. I think it's time you and Dad knew about it. Can you come over for dinner tonight? There's something we all need to discuss." There was a confused silence on the other end of the line. "Dinner? Stella, your sister is having a complete breakdown." "Yes, dinner," I repeated, my voice firm. 7 o'clock. "We have a lot to talk about." I ended the call before she could argue, leaving her sputtering in silence. Marco looked at me, his eyebrows raised in admiration. "Look at you, Stella Rossi," he said softly, drawing a line in the sand. That evening my parents arrived, their faces etched with worry and suspicion. They walked into our small, cozy home as if entering a hostile foreign territory. I had set the dining table simply, with 2 copies of my cookbook placed in the center like a centerpiece. I had also printed out the bank statements from the last 2 years, showing the deposits from my publishing advance and blog revenue, and next to them, the cashier's check receipts for their mortgage payments. I sat them down at the table, Marco a solid, reassuring presence by my side. And then I told them everything. I started with the blog, the hearth and spoon, and the name Stella Rossi. I told them about the viral post, the anonymous checks, the reason their foreclosure had miraculously vanished. I told them about the literary agent, the bidding war, the 6-figure advance. I pushed one of the cookbooks across the table to them. My father picked it up, his mechanic's hands, usually so sure and steady, trembling slightly as he traced my name, my other name, on the cover. My mother just stared, her face a blank canvas of disbelief. "But how?" she whispered. "You never said anything." Her initial shock was already curdling into a familiar accusation. "You were always so quiet. How were we supposed to know you were doing all this?" This was the moment of truth. The moment where I could let her guilt trip me back into my old role. I refused. "You didn't know because you never asked," I said, my voice gentle but unyielding. "You didn't know because every time I tried to share my world with you, you called it peasant food, and turned your back on it. You were too busy investing in Eliza's future to notice that the thing you were ashamed of was the very thing that was saving your house." I slid the bank statements across the table. "This is where the money came from. Not a bank error. Not a miracle. Came from me. It came from Nonna Elena's recipes." My father stared at the papers, his face crumbling. He traced the numbers with his finger, the dates on my deposits lining up perfectly with the dates their payments were made. The reality was stark, undeniable, written in black and white. He looked up at me. His eyes filled with a dawning shame so profound it was painful to witness. He, the patriarch, the provider, had failed, and he had been rescued by the daughter he had consistently overlooked, using the skills he had actively disdained. He looked utterly broken. My mother, on the other hand, was still fighting it, her mind unable to compute this radical rewriting of our family's narrative. "So the audition today," she began. "You knew she would be there. You did it to embarrass her." "No," I said firmly. "I had no idea she would be there. But her embarrassment is not my fault. She embarrassed herself." She stood in a studio dedicated to celebrating honest traditional food and called it peasant fare, that needed to be destroyed and rebuilt. She did that all on her own. The only thing I did was turn on the lights so everyone could see. The room fell silent, the weight of 2 decades of truth pressing down on us. For the first time in my life, I was the one holding all the cards, and the only thing I felt was a vast, quiet sorrow for all the years we had lost. In the days that followed, a fragile, uncertain quiet settled over our family. Eliza did not call. She didn't text. Instead, a week after the disastrous audition, a long, rambling email arrived in my inbox. It was a masterpiece of self-pity and justification, wrapped around a small, hard kernel of an apology. She wrote about the immense pressure she'd been under, the crippling student loan debt, the brutal, soul-crushing environment of the fine dining world. She wrote that she'd been taught to despise simple food because she was terrified of being seen as simple herself, of ending up like me, or so she had thought. "I was jealous," she admitted in a line near the end. "I was jealous that food came so easily to you, that it was a source of joy, while for me it had become a source of constant anxiety and judgment. I'm so sorry, Stella. I was a monster." It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was honest. I read it several times, then closed my laptop. I wasn't ready to reply. Meanwhile, the network was ecstatic. My story was a marketing dream. Hearth and Spoon premiered a few months later to massive ratings and critical acclaim. We found a new sous chef, a young, eager man from New Orleans named Leo, who looked at my recipes with a reverence that still made me blush. The show was everything I had hoped it would be. Our first episode featured a grandmother in rural Appalachia who taught me to make her family's century-old recipe for apple stack cake. I listened to her stories, I held her worn, flour-dusted hands, and I saw my own Nonna Elena in her eyes. On camera I wasn't playing a part. I was just being myself, and it turned out that was more than enough. I was warm, I was genuine, and audiences responded with an outpouring of love and support that felt like the sun on my face after a long winter. A few months into the show's run, I was having a book signing at a large bookstore in my hometown. The line snaked around the block. As I was signing a copy of my cookbook for a young woman, I looked up and saw them at the very back of the line. My parents. They weren't trying to cut in or use their status as my parents to get to the front. They were just waiting, patient and quiet like everyone else. When it was finally their turn, my father, a man I had rarely seen show any emotion beyond gruff disappointment or pride in Eliza, simply pushed his own copy of the book across the table. His eyes were red-rimmed. "We're so proud of you, Stella," he said, his voice thick and cracking. My mother stood beside him, tears streaming silently down her face, and just nodded. It was a simple sentence, but it was the one I had been starving to hear my entire life. It wasn't a magic wand that erased the past, but it was a start. It was a recognition. The true test came a month later. It was a Saturday and I was at home testing a recipe for the show. There was a hesitant knock on the door. I opened it to find Eliza standing on my porch. She looked smaller. The severe chef's coat was gone, replaced by a simple sweater and jeans. The brittle ambition in her eyes had been replaced by a deep, weary sadness. "Hi," she said softly. Can we just talk?" I hesitated for only a second before stepping back and holding the door open. "Come in," I said. She sat at my kitchen table, the same one where she had once mocked my food, and I poured her a cup of coffee. We didn't rehash the audition or the arguments. Instead, we talked about our childhoods, re-examining old memories through this new, painfully clear lens. She told me she had quit her job at Aurelia. "I couldn't stand it anymore," she confessed, stirring her coffee. "I was making food I didn't want to eat for people I didn't respect. I'd lost the plot completely." She told me she had taken a job as a line cook at a small, family-owned Italian bistro in her neighborhood. "They make a bolognese that takes 2 days," she said, a faint, genuine smile on her face. "The owner, he says the secret is a little bit of cinnamon. It's good food, Stell. It just tastes good." We talked for hours. It wasn't a full reconciliation. The wounds were too deep, the scars too old to vanish in a single afternoon. But it was the beginning of something new, something more honest. It was the start of building a new relationship, one not based on the toxic hierarchy of our youth, but on the fragile ground of 2 adult sisters, flawed and humbled, trying to find their way back to each other. As I stand here now in my studio with the cameras ready to roll and the scent of my next recipe filling the air, I realize the incredible irony of it all. For years, I desperately craved the validation of my family. I contorted myself into smaller and smaller shapes to fit into the box they had built for me, hoping one day they would finally see me. But the validation that mattered, the validation that changed my life, came only when I stopped seeking theirs and found my own. Came from a community of strangers on the internet, from a wise literary agent, from a supportive husband, and ultimately from within myself. The shame I carried for my peasant food was never my shame to begin with. It was theirs. My food, Nonna Elena's food, was never a symbol of poverty. It was a symbol of love, of resilience, of a heritage so rich and powerful that it saved them, even when they refused to see its worth. My greatest humiliation became my ultimate liberation. So that's my story. The journey has been longer and harder than I could have ever imagined, but I wouldn't trade a single moment of it. It taught me that your value is not determined by the opinions of others, especially those who are too blind to see you. It taught me that sometimes, being underestimated is the greatest advantage you can have. And it taught me that family isn't just about the blood you share. It's about the love you give and the respect you earn. Thank you so much for joining me and for letting me share this piece of my heart with you.